Syria's President Bashar al Assad has hailed the massive turnout in the country's presidential election held Wednesday. He said Syrians managed to change the rules of the game in their country. In his victory speech, Assad said the mass turnout was a revolution against corruption. He said those who turned out to vote restored the true meaning of revolution after it was distorted by mercenaries. Assad lauded every Syrian in every city who expressed their love for the nation through mass rallies. He stressed that the Syrian people have proven their perseverance and shown capability to fight all enemies. The Syrian president said the fighting spirit is also needed for the upcoming period of constant work and resistance. Assad won a fourth term in office with more than 95% of the votes. Well, to further open up that story, we're joined by our correspondent, Muhammad Ali, who's with us from the Syrian capital, Damascus. Also, we have publisher and editor of Politics First, Mr. Marcus Papadopoulos, who's joining us from the British capital, London. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Muhammad in Damascus. Muhammad, we heard the televised victory speech by President Bashar al Assad. Walk us through the key points that were mentioned.
Yes, President Bashar al Assad was mainly addressing the Syrian people in general. He told the Syrians, and I quote, "What you did in the past several weeks were not just participating in rallies and celebrations, those celebrations were not just an expression of patriotism or commitment to a national duty, which is the election process. What happened, according to Assad, telling the Syrians, was much more important than that. Syrians actually, according to Assad, challenged unprecedentedly the enemies of the country. He said that those celebrations and rallies in support of the election process, which Syrians participated in, those rallies and celebrations were actually a revolution, not just a celebration, a revolution against terrorism and treason. In fact, this is what the Syrian president was telling the Syrians. He also said that Syrians' vote for President Bashar al-Assad is a great honor to him. He also said that we will all be able to defeat our enemies. And finally, and most importantly, he said in his speech, President Bashar al-Assad, that the next phase is a phase of continuous work, steadfastness, and also resistance.
Let's cross over to London now. Mr. Papadopoulos, how significant are the results of this presidential election in Syria?
Well, I believe the results of the Syrian presidential election are highly significant, especially because voter turnout in the election was absolutely massive. The likes of which cannot even be found when elections are held in Western countries such as Britain or America. So the very fact that voter turnout was so exceedingly high really goes to show how the Syrian people, the Syrian man and the Syrian woman, took extremely seriously the presidential election and were determined to ensure that their voice was heard. And their voice has been very clearly heard. President Bashar al Assad has been re-elected and re-elected extremely comfortably. And I might add as well that one of the major factors as to why his election victory has been so incredibly startling is because he is a wartime leader. He has led Syria through the darkest chapter in the country's history. He held himself together. He kept Syria together. He was absolutely resolute in his determination that the independence and sovereignty of Syria would not be given away to anyone and to anybody. And in doing so, he defied some of the most powerful countries in the world, namely America, Britain, France, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And it is for that reason, I believe, that President Assad's election victory, the percentage which he attained, is largely down to that. It's an incredible figure, but then Bashar al Assad is a wartime leader who kept his nerve and kept Syria together. Many other leaders in the world would have buckled at the thought of defying countries such as America and Britain. Well, Bashar al Assad didn't just stand his ground, he actually prevailed, and for that the Syrian people are eternally grateful to him.
Back to Mohammed in Damascus. Mohammed, what are some of the main challenges ahead for President Bashar al Assad as he's been re-elected now?
Yes, surely the main challenge is to improve the economic situation. People are suffering inside Syria for years, especially following the increase of the sanctions that have been imposed in the past couple of years by the West unilaterally, and of course by the United States and Western European countries. Those sanctions have affected negatively the daily lives of the Syrians, because they cannot import anymore in Syria, for example, food or medicine. And this is why President Bashar al-Assad has a major challenge in order how to improve the economic situation and the daily living standards of the Syrians in light of such economic sanctions. This is what the Syrians also demand from the President Bashar al-Assad, who will lead the country in the next 7 years. Of course, in the previous elections in 2014 presidential elections, Syrians were asking for a better economic situation and also the defeat of terrorism. Now we have most parts of the country secured and controlled by the government. What remains is Idlib and also the northeast, where there is an occupation by the United States forces and also by Turkish forces. This is also a demand and a challenge for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
And Marcus Papadopoulos, your thoughts on the same question? What do you think are some of the main challenges right now in President Assad's next term?
There's no doubt about it that the most pressing priority facing President Assad, his government and the Syrian people as a whole is the rebuilding of the Syrian economy. The Syrian economy has been regrettably devastated by the war which was brought to Syria by outside forces. Then there are the sanctions which the Syrian economy has to contend with. So there is no doubt about it that the rebuilding of the Syrian economy will be the most important priority facing the Syrian government. After that, it will be liberating those parts of northern Syria which are under illegal foreign occupation. In the northeast of Syria, the American military is illegally present there, and in the northwest of Syria, there is a illegal presence of a combined Turkish army and al-Qaeda force there. So all of Syria must be liberated. And thirdly, of course, the Syrian refugee issue has to be resolved. And the Syrian refugees in countries such as Lebanon and Jordan are very keen to return to Syria. However, Britain is one such country which is actually covertly paying Syrian refugees in, for instance, Lebanon, to remain in Lebanon as a way of keeping the refugee crisis issue alive, so that the British state can keep the pressure going on the Syrian government. Now, that is something that the Syrian government is going to have to highlight to the rest of the international stage, what Britain is actually doing. The British state is using British taxpayers' money to pay Syrian refugees to stay put in Lebanon. That is another example of how devious and how conniving the British state is. So rebuilding the Syrian economy is priority number one. The liberation of all of Syrian territory, and thirdly, the return of the Syrian refugees to their homeland. And the British state must be continuously exposed for what it is doing, namely paying Syrian refugees to stay put in countries such as Lebanon.
All right, thanks a lot. Muhammad Ali, our correspondent, joining us from the Syrian capital, Damascus, and also special thanks to publisher and editor at Politics First, Marcus Papadopoulos, speaking to us from London.